Hello, I'm Shannon Morrow from Surf Sitters Pet Care and Up with Pups Dog Training. This is a recorded version of the Orientation to Positive Training. Hopefully in this recorded PowerPoint, you will learn a little bit about how dogs learn and how to move forward with the best practices for training your pup. Here we go. I'm going to share my screen with you and we'll get started. Sorry. Okay. Here we go. Okay, so Up with Pups Dog Training, training empowerment for pups and their people. Let's keep going. This is me. I'm a KPA Puppy Start Right instructor and also a certified dog trainer. Started working with dogs in about 2015 and got my certification in 2020. All right, so this is not a class, so we're going to just skip right through that. Okay, this presentation is specifically designed for owners of dogs enrolled in our online classes or private lessons to practice and receive coaching. Classes will support the content in your syllabus video library, which you can refer to between sessions. So that's one thing about us, is that we provide these backup tutorials for you so that you can practice between sessions. And that's really important because if you take your dog, let's say, to a board and train, dog comes back perfectly behaved. If you don't know the skills, the dog's behavior will fall off. So let's keep going. So we're going to cover in this short session what to expect from your training sessions and classes, how dogs learn, introduction to positive training, what is it, a little bit for you, your own human learning skills, and that's our nerd out section, and then basic information on successful canine parenting and how to use your online video tutorials. All right, so what to expect from me. I'm your teacher, whether you're taking an online class or whether I'm working with you in person or via Zoom. You can expect positive, respectful methods. That's with your dog. I will never startle your dog, hurt your dog, scare your dog. I will never use anything that physically causes pain for your dog, and that's part of positive reinforcement training. But for you as a pet parent, I pledge to be respectful to you too. So if there's something going on that you don't understand, or you feel like I'm not hearing you and your problems with your dog, please let me know. So clear communication, I want us to go back and forth, whether it's by text, email, phone, or our online support groups, Facebook and New Zenler. I will provide you with as many handouts and video tutorials as possible. And what you can expect through these lessons and classes is a calmer, more balanced and responsive dog. Hopefully some fun for both of you, because we want training to be fun and we want your dogs to love it. And then of course, improvement will be gradual. It's not going to happen in one session. Training is actually a lifelong activity, and that's why we want it to be a fun, sort of enrichment activity for both you and your dog, a bonding experience. Okay. All right, so now we're going to get into the really important stuff, how dogs learn. What shapes a dog's behavior? Well, there are a few different components which we'll go through briefly. So there's genetics, there's learning and experience. So think nurture and nature. Selective breeding creates innate needs, desires, and behaviors. So some of your dog's behavior traits are a product of breeding. So you know, let's take barking for instance. You know, it's a herding behavior or a protective behavior. And then of course also sometimes it's because it's an there are environmental factors. But the main thing for you to know as someone who is training and working with your dog is that dogs learn through association and consequence. We're going to get more and more into that. Dogs are always learning. So they have these associations with everything, and they can be positive associations that create better behavior, or they can be negative associations that create fear and anxiety. Dogs are always learning, and dogs will always repeat behaviors that they have success with. And so, what I want to say about that is if your dog jumps up on a counter and gets something yummy to eat, guess what's going to happen? The dog's going to jump up on the counter again. They always repeat successful behaviors. All right, here we go. And that's why prevention, prevention and management, which we'll talk about throughout our training sessions, are so important. A little bit more about selective breeding, or just, genetics in general. Problem behaviors arise when dogs can't satisfy internal drive. So, dogs have these needs, and, our dogs are mainly companion dogs now, so they don't really have their jobs, but they still have this, like, I'm supposed to be doing something. And a lot of that will come out, if we don't provide alternate activities for them, then some of that drive will create these problem behaviors. And again, that goes back to, well, just for example, a herding dog might start nipping at calves or ankles. A terrier might dig. Some dogs that are protective might get more protective. So it's really our job to A, socialize, B, train, and C, provide a lot of activity and stimulating activities and enrichment for our dogs so that they can express those needs in a healthy way. So it's really helpful for you if you research your dog's breed, if you can, and see what those dogs were bred for, because then we can do more with providing fun games for them that sort of take the place of those drives that they have. So you can be thinking about what outlets might satisfy your dog's needs. So for instance, retrievers, of course, they're going to want to, play fetch, go in the water. And of course, all dogs are different. Every once in a while, there's a lab that doesn't like water, but, things like that. Herding, maybe herding balls into a basket, maybe some agility. Dogs that are mouthy might like games of tug. There are lots of different games, and I will do my best to provide you with resources and video tutorials on some of those fun games. All right, here we go. Moving on. All right, so the developmental stages. All right, I'm just going to leave this up for you to look at. It's going to come up in your training materials. We don't have to go into great detail about that right now. But looks like there are 8 stages here. Your dog's going to fall into one of them, and it's really interesting to learn about those stages. So you can always come back and pause this and view that. All right, so this is what we're going to be doing. So this is introduction to positive training. What does that mean? It means that we're using positive reinforcement as our primary method of training. Dogs respond really well to being reinforced, to the repetition of the behaviors, and then of course reinforcing those behaviors with something that they love. And usually that's food. Sometimes it's play, sometimes it's praise, sometimes it's a good, tussle. They like all of that. We want to encourage them and build their confidence through taking small steps in training that provide them with lots of successes. So the more success, they're just like us. The more successes they have, the more they want to learn, the more confident they feel about their learning. In this little section, we're going to forget the alpha dog concept. What the heck is that? And why would we think that we need it? The problem with reprimands, and that's a big one that most of us don't understand, and why not to use them, how dogs think, and then an overview of our clicker or marker training. All right, so your dog is not trying to dominate you, no matter what you think. Sometimes it seems like they are. If you want more detail, I'm happy to provide handouts, but this is what I've got for you on the PowerPoint. So behavior we talked about is some genetic, but that's still not about dominance. That's about doing jobs and internal drive and needs. Behavior is about learning and consequences. So, you know, if your dog jumps on you and you reinforce with a hug when they're a puppy, they're going to continue jumping because that behavior has been reinforced. They're not trying to dominate you. We can talk more about jumping later because it's so common. If your dog does not comply to your cues or your commands, it's because A, there's something better going on elsewhere, something else distracting in the environment. That's why we have to make training fun and make our dogs love to learn and love to listen to us. It also could be that your dog is fearful or anxious. So, you know, if I take a dog into a crowd and the dog's on leash and the dog puts on the brakes, does it mean that the dog is being stubborn and trying to dominate me? No, it means that the dog is fearful of going into the crowd. Now, here's the catch. If I turn around and take the dog the other way, the dog is going to learn, because they're always learning and they always repeat successful behaviors. The dog's going to learn to always put the brakes on when he or she doesn't want to go somewhere. But we have to work with that, and the way to work with that is not to reprimand, not to force the dog to go into the situation that makes them fearful. The way to work with that is to back up, to socialize or desensitize, and make each, you know, take tiny steps so that eventually the dog is more comfortable going into the crowd. So, you know, part of that is identifying the triggers, getting to know our dogs and their personalities. And, you know, we could go on about that because some dogs are just not big crowd dogs, but there are ways to boost our dog's confidence and also introduce them to new situations and have them follow our cues because they trust us. All right, so if your dog does not comply, your dog may not understand you. You know, I could say, sit, 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 sit. But if my dog doesn't know what sit means, my dog is not going to sit. Or leave it, don't touch that. Okay. Dogs always repeat successful behaviors, which we've talked about. And dogs, basically, they act to get their needs met. So if a dog is growling, it doesn't mean the dog is trying to dominate. The dog is experiencing some kind of fear or anxiety, and that could be about people. It could be about a resource like a bone or food being taken away. But that does not mean that the dog is trying to be dominant. All right, so let's keep going. Okay, the problem with reprimands. Now, we all do this. I cannot tell you that I never say no to my dog. It's a practice. But what we want to do is we want to replace no with what we want the dog to do, because that gives the dog the information that he or she needs. So, you know, imagine you're in your workplace and you're doing something and your boss comes up and says no. Well, what does that mean? Stop writing, get off the computer. You know, I'm really confused here. My boss needs to give me more information. What does my boss want me to do? Now, using these reprimands or harsh punitive methods also can cause some shutdown. You know, dogs become afraid to offer behaviors, and that's really what we want. Is they're going to start to learn to offer you behaviors in hopes of getting rewards. So it creates it, you know, it's stimulating for them when they learn in a positive way. And it's a better, more compassionate and kinder way to train your dog to be a polite member of your household. So using no doesn't tell your dog what to do. It creates fear and anxiety. It inhibits learning and creativity. It can cause or exacerbate problem behaviors. And if it is used successfully to teach a behavior, the behavior is only being performed because your dog is scared. So that's not a way for us to start training. So let's not do that. Let's find better ways. All right, how do dogs think? Well, They're opportunistic. So for example, if I drop a treat on the floor between my two dogs, I know who's going to snap it up, and he's just going to be like, well, it was there. There's nothing wrong with that. But he's not out to get his sister's treat. He just sees something on the floor, and, you know, finders keepers, losers weepers. They're amoral. They're not really thinking about what's right or wrong. They are self-centered. Again, the example of the treats. They are social, which is wonderful, and it's great for us to provide them with a lot of opportunities to experience their social nature. They're chewers, explorers, finders, and diggers, and they always learn from their actions. All right, so what is clicker training? Now, some of you are going to use the clicker, and some of you are going to use a marker. So when I say clicker and marker, those are kind of interchangeable, but you know, so a clicker is a way to communicate with a dog, and so is a marker, which is just a word. It's a handheld device that makes a very distinct sound. The click sound is paired with a treat or a desired reward, and that creates an association. So it's like Pavlov's dog. So, you know, you make the sound and you give the dog a treat, and eventually the dog, when the dog hears the sound, they think treat. And we use that clicker or that marker word when our dog goes into a behavior that we want them to repeat. So if I click exactly when my dog sits, my dog knows what the behavior was that got him the treat, and he's going to learn to repeat that behavior. And the clicker works really well. Dogs actually learn about 45% faster when using the clicker, and that's because it's so distinct. And we can use our voices. We can say, yes, so good, if we don't want to use the clicker, but it really does work very well for most dogs, because that clicker is a, you know, if you think about it, we're talking all the time. Dogs are just kind of like, what's she saying? So the sound is something that really catches their attention. All right, benefits of clicker training. Distinct sound helps dogs learn faster, promotes creativity, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Well, dogs start offering behaviors that they associate with the clicker or the marker word in hopes of getting a treat. It's like playing the lottery. And it makes capturing those behaviors that you want to capture faster. Now, the great thing, you know, one thing I want to say that I don't think is on the slides is that you don't always have to have the clicker for the rest of the dog's life. So after the dog learns the behavior reliably, you can start replacing that click sound with a marker word like good or yes. It just helps initiate or it helps facilitate the training faster. Okay, 4 basic steps of clicker training. We have some videos on this. You get the behavior by luring or noticing, that's called capturing, when your dog does something desirable. And we'll talk about luring later. Capturing, let's say my dog sits, if I've got the clicker, bam, click, when the dog sits. I'm just noticing. And then the dog starts to associate the click with the sit, and the dog gets rewarded, and the behavior starts happening more frequently. So we mark the behavior after we click. We mark the behavior with a click, and then we reinforce the learner. And the more we reinforce, the faster the rate of reinforcement, the faster the dog learns. Then after the dog is performing the behavior reliably, then we start adding the cue word before when you say sit, the dog sits, click, treat. But don't just start saying sit, because your dog will be like, what? Okay. All right. So you'll find in your video in your library that you have a video on using the clicker. There are a couple of them. So I'm going to skip through this video, but you can find it in the next section of your online library. All right, so methods of teaching behavior. We talked a little bit about luring and capturing. The positive methods, so luring, that's when you use a treat in front of the dog's nose and you lure the dog into whatever shape you want the dog to be in, like a sit, or you can lure into the heel position. Similar to luring is targeting, and that's when you teach a dog to follow your hand or follow a stick. It promotes a little bit more creativity and thinking on the dog's part, so we want to move away from luring into targeting when we can. Capturing, so that's when we're noticing good behaviors and we're clicking or marking and rewarding those behaviors. So for example, you have a new puppy in the house and you notice the puppy sitting. Good, give the puppy a treat, and eventually you can start adding the cue and the puppy will learn what sit needs. You can do that with older dogs too. Shaping. So that means when we're taking incremental steps towards a behavior. A lot of dogs, and this is really common, dogs don't want to go into the down, so their butts pop up. So sometimes we have to use the step of luring the dog's head down a little bit and rewarding, then luring the dog's head down a little bit more. Then eventually the paws start coming out, and then eventually they're laying on the floor. So that's what shaping's all about. Negative methods, modeling. That's when you force your dog's body into a position. Like a lot of people, will force the dog's butt down into a sit. It's a punitive measure. It can scare your dog. It can cause the shutdown that we talked about earlier, and it can also be physically harmful to your dog. So you want to avoid that. And then reprimanding, startling, scaring, or physically punishing your dog. That's what we don't want to do. All right, moving right along. If we can get the slide to move along. All right, successful canine parenting. Canine parenting is similar to child rearing. We want to provide guidance, predictability, direction, and security rather than resorting to reprimands. Be fair, understand the dog's perspective. So, we talked about why dogs perform any kind of behavior, from digging to, jumping to wanting to sit on your lap. When your dog is exhibiting a behavior that you are not happy with, try to think of it from the dog's perspective. So, for example, if your dog is digging in your garden, the dog doesn't know that you don't want. Well, even if the dog does know that you don't want him to dig in your garden, you possibly have not provided a suitable outlet. So a separate sandbox or, other area of your yard that your dog can dig. That's a natural genetic dog behavior. And we certainly don't want to punish dogs for performing dog behaviors. They need outlets. Be a good teacher. So be clear in your communication, take incremental steps, don't expect too much, don't expect your dog to be perfect overnight. Provide clear communication, and that'll go to our marking and our rewarding. Be consistent and predictable. So if your dog jumps on you one day and you give the dog a big hug and the next day you're like, get off of me, then that's really confusing to the dog and it can create a lot of anxiety. And be your dog's advocate. So, if someone is approaching you and your dog is uncomfortable with that, it's okay to let that person know, my dog's in training, my dog's shy, just be honest. It's okay. All right, so how to use your tutorials. You're gonna, if you haven't already enrolled, you're gonna receive an email inviting you to enroll. When you get the email, you go to upwithpupsdogtraining.com. You create your username and password and log in. Your video tutorials and supplemental handouts will be in that library. If you have any trouble, just contact me via text, phone, or email. And I believe that is our last slide. Try it one more time. Yep, that's the last slide. So thank you for taking the time to watch this recorded orientation. I hope that it was beneficial and helpful for you and your dog. Please do let me know if you have questions. I have a lot of materials that I can give to you if you want to learn more about how dogs learn, about their behavior, about the difference between dogs and wolves, which is where the whole alpha training and, you know, forceful training thing came from. And that's it. I want you and your dog to have fun, and I wish you the best experience possible and hope that I will be a positive part of that. Thank you.